Okay, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to HANA's first quarter review. So our first quarter profits came in with 384 million. This was up 3% year on year, but down 2% on the quarter. Our sales were up in baht terms 17%, but in dollar terms about 9% because of exchange situation. Operating profits up 3% and margins were down 1%. We generated 743 million baht of EBITDA, up 7%, and net profits increased 21% from 301 to 365 million because of less exchange loss in this quarter compared to last quarter. And our net cash and short-term investments dropped 44% from 9.8 billion to 5.4 billion as we invest heavily in our future growth. Quarter on quarter, our sales were down 2%. Similar to operating profits, the margin was the same at 6%, and the rest was the same. Now, of course, in the fourth quarter, we had some exceptional losses, so this did not occur in the first quarter. So there was a big increase from a loss of 56 million to a gain of 365 million. Moving on to each of our operations. In Lamphun, sales were up 17% quarter on quarter from 2.36 billion to 2.76 billion. We continue to see strong growth in our automotive and RF business, including commercial and industrial. There were continuing shortages of materials from IC, chip caps and resistors, but this, I think, will improve as we go through the year. Our COVID situation is improving all the time, which is similar to the trend we see nationally. Tracking some of the important industries that HANA is exposed to, automotive sales were down 22% in the first quarter, but I think most of that was because last year, the first quarter was exceptionally high. So I would say that this 16 to 20% drop is more in relation to the very high increase last year as we came out of the COVID situation. The current levels of around 14 million is a more normal level. Going forward, the market is expecting a drop of around 2% from last year compared to a growth of last year of 4 to 6%. And this is because there continues to be a shortage of chip supply for the auto industry. And obviously the Russian-Ukraine war is impacting the supply chain. And recently now the China lockdown is also impacting local consumer demand and supply chain as well. Many auto companies now are focusing more on higher specification models. So the units will fall, but the value will increase. And if you want to buy a car now, I'm sure all of you will know there's a long waiting list. In addition, higher interest rates as the Fed increases lending will also increase the leasing costs, and most cars are bought on some kind of finance. From HANA's auto business, we continue to see some growth, but we are concerned about the future outlook given the global economic situation. Our main customer is Sensata, and I recently had a call with them, and they are still quite confident of seeing at least a single-digit growth this year. Interestingly enough, sales of EV cars continue to be very strong despite an increase in commodity costs caused by the conflict in Ukraine, such as nickel and cobalt. And you can see from the chart here how the increase in the prices of this important commodity, which is part of the battery cost, is increasing. But despite that, you saw very strong growth in EVs. I picked up a couple of announcements from recent newspaper, like VW sells out electric cars, Tesla delivers record, BMW double sales, Mercedes-Benz massive increase, and the sales of EV is really starting to grow. Moving on to China, for our micro business in Jiaxing, we recorded sales up 25%. From 567 to 710. We saw improvements in our IT hardware, but a drop in our consumer business as the post-COVID effects started to change consumer expenditure patterns. We start to see negative impact due to the lockdown initially, you may recall, in Shenzhen, and then, of course, to a much bigger extent in Shanghai. Now, Fortunately, our operation in Jiaxing has not been locked down, even though Jiaxing is very close to Shanghai. But we use the Shanghai infrastructure, the ports, the airports, so we could not get material. And therefore, I am projecting in the second quarter an impact of a drop of about 25% on our output due to the fact that we cannot get materials because of the lockdown in Shanghai. And on top of that, we see utility cost increases like gas 37% and electricity 17%. So China is again going through a very difficult situation caused by specifically the lockdown in Shanghai. I want to move on to our smartphone business because this is the biggest exposure to the HANA. And this is a chart that was made at the beginning of this year before the Ukraine war and obviously before China lockdown. And you can see that they were projecting growth from 1.65 billion to 1.89 billion. Okay, but in the 3 months of the first quarter, the world has changed dramatically. So post-war, pre-war, the forecast was a growth of around 14%. As the industry expected people, customers to continue to adopt 5G and the global recovery continue to grow. And then we have the big shock of the Russian-Ukrainian war, increasing inflation dramatically. The Federal Reserve then increased rates extremely high now and continuing. And this has put a big impact on a number of industries, including smartphone. Russia was a big market for the China handset industry, and the Russian market is zero because they cannot even pay, they cannot get their money out. So that one, and then of course, China locking down. So these two factors will have a significant impact on the smartphone business, especially Android, where China is the biggest supplier and biggest consumer. So global mobile shipments now are probably expected to fall around 5 to 6% globally, driven by China dropping around 20%. And how long the war will last, I don't know, but sanctions will continue to last longer. And here are a couple of charts to show how the first quarter hit on smartphones are going to hit this industry. Moving on to UTR, our sales increased 9% in the first quarter from 1.85 to 201 billion. Despite a top line increase, the product mix change impacted our margins. So we couldn't really get the benefit to the extent of our top line growth. But we do see an improvement for materials such as lead frames, although machinery still remains quite lengthy in lead time for delivery. The industrial sector did not grow as much as was forecasted, but we expect to see an improvement in the third quarter. And we believe the second quarter outlook, we would see a single-digit growth continuing, and because some of the contracts that we signed, take-or-pay contracts, will start to kick in around May and June. If we look at the overall demand for semiconductors as an industry, year-on-year up 23%. This is the global demand. But interestingly, for the quarter, down 0.5. And if you look at this chart, it's a little bit busy, but you can see in the middle there, sales up 23% year-on-year, but month-on-month only 1.1%. And the moving average is down 0.5. So what this is telling us is that even though year-on-year you have strong growth, the rate of growth is starting to slow. Moving on to Jiaxing. For the IC business, we saw 28% increase in top line sales, especially good growth for our non-standard IC, such as EV modules, LED projectors, very, very strong. But our standard IC business, which relates to mobile phones, dropped due to the reasons I said before. Okay. Of course, the second quarter is going to be very difficult because of the lockdown situation in Shanghai. And as I mentioned earlier, we expect about 25% less output because of material shortages. Here is a chart showing the average wire bonds per quarter. You can see it dropped slightly from the fourth quarter, which is seasonal, but more or less in line from a year ago. Moving on to the USA, our sales increased 45% in the first quarter. The COVID situation is getting much better, but I wouldn't say it's over. America is the country which really ignored COVID, and nobody wears masks, so it affected us quite significantly. Revenues were driven by the growth of our inlay business. These are the RFID inlays and tire tags, okay? And that business grew 65% year on year and accounts for 63% of the groups of that division's revenue. And just to give you an illustration, our microelectronics, which accounts for 37%, only grew 2% year on year. So you can see the growth of the RFID business, which we started a year ago now, has been the right decision. Okay, we expect to see that growth continuing, maybe another 10 to 15% in this quarter, second quarter. And as a result of this quite fast growth, we are going to buy a new factory. We're going to double our footprint from 47,000 square foot to 110,000 square foot, which will be ready by the third quarter, and preparing ourselves for expansion. So HANA, Ohio is the world's leading producer of tire tags. And we work closely with the French Michelin tire company. And this is a picture of the lines that we produce. This business, we tag everything that's sold. So the big retailers like Walmart, Target, are all adopting this RFID tag. This will improve their inventory management dramatically. Moving on to Cambodia, sales were up 52%, but you know the overall volume is still relatively small. As you know, our Cambodia operation still is not at break-even level yet, but we have some good news that we have won a new, quite interesting job to produce passive components. There's a picture of it below at the bottom on the left, and this will reduce losses by the fourth quarter. And we're going to develop an in-house semi-automatic line in order to improve the productivity. So we are very happy that we are going in the right direction. And now the border is opening, people can travel, customers can come in and visit us, and we expect the situation to improve throughout the course of this year. As you know, there's a lot of increase in the minimum wage. Thailand is coming, Malaysia already, China is already expensive, and that makes Cambodia quite competitive. Here is a pie chart. Basically, telcos were up 2%, autos +1%, industrials +2%, computer down 3%, opto flat, consumer minus, RFID up 2%, and medical down 1%. So a quick slide on what I think the second quarter outlook will be. Sanctions due to the Ukrainian conflict will continue to keep oil prices high, so inflation will not go away. We expect a tighter labor market due to the rising cost of inflation. At the moment, consumer demand in the West remains fairly strong, particularly the USA, but we believe that Europe is going to be quite impacted because of the energy issue with Russia. And of course, China being locked down is going to take a big hit. But I think China will come back quite quickly in the third quarter because they will, impose a lot of supportive policies. As I mentioned, Jiaxing, even though not under lockdown, but will have a 25% drop in output. Okay, so that's going to impact that division. The Shanghai is starting to recover now, but it will take at least, I think, 3 to 4 weeks to get back into normal situation, if not longer. So in summary, whilst our order book is not seeing any significant drop due to this problem with supply chain disruption and rising costs, they will continue to pressure margins going forward. That said, we do see some relief as the Thai baht remains weak. And you can see from this chart, the Thai baht is now at about a 5-year high. So hopefully that will be maintained and that will give us some relief. In terms of our liquidity, we've got a generating of 743 million baht, EBITDA. Net cash was down 5.5 as we invest heavily in the future. And we spent 790 million, up from 616. We remain, our capex forecast is 3.5 to 3.8 billion, which includes Korea. Now I'll talk a little bit about our silicon carbide situation. So the machinery, as you know, has been ordered and is coming in. So that's on track. We are hoping and praying that we will not have any delays, because quite often our suppliers delay some piece of equipment, but so far so good. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. And the good news is that we have successfully produced our first silicon carbide device ahead of schedule, silicon MOSFET, meeting all internal performance metrics, and we will distribute samples to target customers for their evaluation over the course of the second and third quarter. And of course, we have received very strong interest for companies to evaluate this very important device. Okay, but I need to explain to you that the silicon carbide MOSFET, which is very important for the auto industry, will take between 12 and 18 months for companies to evaluate them. Okay. You may recall I gave some guidance of the loss of PowerMaster as we ramp up of between 580 and 620 million baht, and I do not believe there's any change in that guidance which we gave earlier on. EBITDA will continue to be negative throughout this year, but we hope to improve as we go to mass production, and we still target the break even by middle of next year, or maybe earlier if we can get our production up more quickly. And P&L break even still by the end of 24, early 25. The silicon carbide MOSFET is a very important device and a very difficult one to produce. So we're very happy that the results coming through look very positive, and they support, apart from the obvious EV car and charger, many other industries will require the MOSFET, which is a very important device. Every EV car needs an inverter, right? Because you're converting DC energy into AC energy, okay? And every inverter will need about 14 modules, okay? And every module has 6 packs, and every pack is two devices, a diode and a MOSFET, right? The silicon carbide diode and MOSFET. So every EV car needs 84 diodes and 84 MOSFETs. So as the number of EV car grows up, you can see why you need so many more silicon carbide devices. And in the first quarter of this year, the growth of EV cars in Europe was up 55% year on year, USA 76, UK over 100, and China 145%. Of course, this is before China lockdown, okay? But this is to show you that the EV story is going to really take off, and it's really happening now. If you want to buy an EV car, you probably have to wait at least a year. And China is the world's largest producer and consumer of EV cars, okay? Last year, the total number of cars produced was approximately 6.75 million, which is about 8% of total cars. But as you saw from the previous chart, the rate of growth is between 70 and over 100% per year. So, of course, from a low base, it's going to increase. So, PMS, our subsidiary, has strong synergies to HANA's core business. We will use that device to build our own modules. We will offer our capability on a foundry basis, and we already have our first major development deal. And silicon carbide will play a very important role in supporting our core business as we move from a service company to a product company. And we are investing in the back-end solutions to accommodate our silicon carbide devices. So when they come out at the end of this year and onwards, we will be in a position to assemble them both in discrete packages and in module packages as well, which is a totally new business and a very big business that HANA's never been in before. So there's a good opportunity for growth. This ends my presentation, and I will go to the questions now. So the first question is, how is the factory situation? I would explain that to you. Our machinery is coming in at the moment, so we are not increasing any more than our original plans. What we have to focus on now is getting our equipment when it comes in up to mass production and at good yields. So gross margins are affected because of quite often because of a mix. Okay, some products have a higher material content than others, and that's why in some quarters, because of a different mix in the customer's demand, we get a change in, even though you have a top line growth, that growth can be in a product line that has a high material content, so that it affects the gross margin. And this has been something which always happens and can be out of our control. And it can improve and get worse depending on the mix. That's all? Okay. Please feel free to ask any questions. Speaking Thai, but entitled.
ถ้ามีคำถามเพิ่มเติมเชิญเลยนะคะถามเป็นภาษาไทยได้นะคะพิมพ์มาเป็นภาษาไทยได้นะคะ
So whilst we're waiting for any other questions, perhaps I can give you some idea about the silicon carbide ramp up. So as the machines come in, we have to put them into the factory, and we have to start qualification, and that takes quite some time. And you probably would expect to see the wafers coming out with relatively low yields. And then we analyze the wafers to understand which part of the process is creating the low yield. And then you adjust the parameters of that particular equipment, and then you do it again. So that's why it takes some time to develop a good yield. Okay, and building a wafer fab is not an easy thing. Okay, so another question's come in about the news that Apple will produce less iPhones than forecast. Absolutely correct. Apple is very dependent on China for its supply chain, and many of their suppliers are in the Shanghai or Greater Shanghai area, and as a result of the lockdown, they have not been able to produce. So I read a report that next quarter, Apple may see $8 billion reduction in their sales as a result of the lockdown situation. Of course, what is even more important for them is getting their new models up. So there's going to be a huge pressure for these companies who have been shut down now for 6 weeks to be able to catch up. Luckily, HANA is not that involved in the Apple supply chain, so we don't have that pressure. Okay, whilst we're waiting for some more questions, maybe I will continue to explain our business model. Here we go. So somebody's asked a question. It seems like chip prices will continue to rise this year as major chip makers announced to raise 10% prices. Do you see OSAT business will impact from this? Okay, the story you're reading about are from the big companies like TSMC and Samsung, who virtually have a monopoly on the devices that they build. So they are able to command this type of price increase. the situation is not quite the same in the back end, the OSAT business. So we actually have raised prices in the past, more in a response to rising costs, and we are trying to raise some prices. But I think we do not have the monopolistic type of situation compared to the wafer fabs. Our ability to raise prices will be limited. I think there's some opportunity because we do experience increased costs in energy, commodities, etc. And of course, labor is coming for us as well. So I think our customers will be reasonable, but we don't have that kind of bargaining power that the major chip companies have. Okay, so going back to, whilst we're waiting for more questions about silicon carbide, I want to explain to you that the strategy of how PowerMaster will work with HANA is that once PowerMaster has their silicon carbide devices, we can use this and build our own modules, okay? So that's why I talk about HANA moving from a service company to a product company, because in the past, we would try to offer the services of assembling a module. Now, I don't need to ask because I control the actual device. So we can build our own module, which we can even brand, HANA brand if you want, okay? So I think this is quite an interesting and significant shift in HANA's policy. And that's why the silicon carbide chip manufacturing project is so important for us and should drive our growth going forward. And the other interesting and I think important thing to understand is that, you know, everyone is very worried about global recession, okay? I'm sure every day you read about it in the financial newspapers. And like you, I'm also worried, okay? But the one thing I feel relatively confident about is the change from the internal combustion engine, what we call ICE cars, to EV cars, right? This is going to happen even if we go into a global recession, okay? Because this whole thing is driven by national direction to reduce carbon emissions and global warming. And pretty much the whole world has set targets to reduce global emissions by certain percentages and reduce the warming of the earth by 2 degrees within the next 15 years or so. So the car industry is a very important one. There are many others, but the car industry is a very important one, which has to play its part. And that's why you will see this continuing development and movement from ICE cars to EV cars, even if we go through a recession. And let's assume we do go into recession by the end of this year and early next year. Probably it will last about a year to a year and a half, maximum 2, I would have thought. And then we start coming out. Even then, we have not got to a situation where we have changed all ICE cars to EV cars. It's going to take at least 10 to 15 years to do that. So this evolution is going to take, you know, we're at the beginning of a 10-year cycle, whereas every other industry typically will have about a 3 to 4 year cycle. So I think we're at the right industry at the right time. Please feel free to ask any questions.
คำถามเป็นภาษาไทยนะคะสักครู่นะคะ
I will say in English, you can translate. So the reason why we are why we put our factory in Korea is because in Korea, there's a lot of expertise in power management, and I was fortunate enough to assemble a team of experts in Korea, and we basically have been funding them, and we get some quite good support from the Korean government as well for investment. So Korea is a good place, to put a wafer fab because all the suppliers are there, and the people with the design capability are there as well. Plus, we get support from the Korean government. So it is a very advantageous place to locate this type of business.
โอเคนะคะข้อ7นะคะคำถามว่าเหตุผลที่ตั้งโรงงานในเกาหลีมีอะไรบ้างคุณริชาร์ดอธิบายว่าเพราะทางเกาหลีเรามีผู้เชี่ยวชาญโดยตรงเกี่ยวกับเรื่องเวเฟอร์เรื่องซิลิคอนคาร์ไบด์แล้วเราก็ยังได้การสนับสนุนจากรัฐบาลเกาหลีด้วยนะคะนั่นจึงเป็นสาเหตุที่เราไปตั้งโรงงานในเกาหลีนะคะโอเคข้อ8
And it's about yeah. So I have not seen specifically what type of investments Russia are proposing in Thailand. It may be other industries, but I'm not aware that they are interesting to invest in the type of business that HANA is involved in, which is, electronic manufacturing and assembly. But if we were approached by a Russian company to do so, as long as it would not be considered in breach of international sanctions, we're always open to discuss.
โอเคนะคะข้อ8นะคะคุณริชาร์ดอธิบายว่าตอนนี้ยังไม่เห็นชัดเจนนะคะว่าทางรัสเซียจะมีข้อเสนออะไรให้กับทางไทยซึ่งโดยเฉพาะกับโรงงานอิเล็กทรอนิกส์แบบเรานะคะแต่ว่าถ้ารัฐบาลรัสเซียมีข้อเสนอที่เกี่ยวข้องกับทางธุรกิจของเราเรื่องวัตถุดิบเนี่ยเราก็มีความสนใจถ้ามันไม่มีข้อขัดแย้งกับเรื่องที่เป็นการแซงชั่นกับรัสเซียนะคะเชิญถามเพิ่มได้นะคะสักครู่นะคะ
Okay, so I'll answer the first number 10. How much investment has we made in Korea to date, and how many employees do you have right now and in the future? So we have committed close to $200 million since we started this project 5 years ago, which includes the investment, which is coming for the mass production equipment. So we haven't spent that money yet, but we are committing to spend probably that kind of money by the end of this year. Okay. We started off with 12 employees. We now have just over 100, and we will probably have to go to 120 to 130 by the end of this year as we go into mass production.
Okay, number 9.
So we reached Korea. We are targeting 2 major locations, China and Korea. Okay, because that is where the big demand is for manufacturing big machinery and automobiles.
ข้อ 9 นะคะคำถามที่ว่าชิ้นส่วนที่ผลิตในเกาหลีส่งให้คู่ค้าที่ไหนบ้างเกาหลีหรือว่าส่งออกทั่วโลกนี่หลักๆเราส่งที่เกาหลีแล้วก็เมืองจีนนะคะเป็นหลักเลยเพื่อที่จะเอาไปซัพพลายในส่วนของอุตสาหกรรมยานยนต์นะคะ
And we're not focusing on the US or Europe at the moment.
ค่ะแล้วเราก็ยังไม่ได้คิดถึงที่จะส่งไปที่ยุโรปหรืออเมริกานะคะตอนนี้ข้อ 11 นะคะ
The parts that we produce in our factory in Korea, of course, the EV is the big one, but they can be used in many other machinery that is transferring high levels of electricity. So you've got things like photovoltaic, right? The solar panel, okay? Heavy machinery like trains, cranes, a lot, high level of transmission of voltage. This is where silicon carbide is the right solution. You do not need silicon carbide to charge your phone, okay? It must be 600 volts up to 1,700 volts. So where you need that kind of voltage transmission, this is where silicon carbide is the perfect solution.
ข้อ 11 นะคะคุณริชาร์ดอธิบายว่าชิ้นส่วนที่ผลิตในโรงงานเกาหลีเนี่ยคำถามก็คือว่าส่วนใหญ่ส่งไปให้อุตสาหกรรมใดนะคะยานยนต์ EV คอมพิวเตอร์หรือเครื่องจักรนะคะคำตอบก็คือหลักๆก็เป็นยานยนต์เครื่องจักร EV แล้วก็เครื่องจักรเนี่ยจะต้องเป็นเครื่องจักรที่ต้องการใช้กำลังไฟสูงเพราะว่าตัวเวเฟอร์ที่เป็นซิลิคอนคาร์ไบด์เนี่ยมันเหมาะสำหรับเครื่องจักรหรือยานยนต์อย่างรถไฟหรือเครนที่นี้ต้องการกำลังไฟที่600โวลต์ขึ้นไปถึง 1,000 โวลต์อะไรเงี้ย high voltage อะค่ะนะคะ
For example, the big screen TV now uses a lot of power. So now they are switching to silicon carbide for the 80-inch, 100-inch TV.
ค่ะแล้วก็มีอย่างจอทีวีที่80นิ้ว100นิ้วขึ้นไปอย่างเงี้ยค่ะก็ใช้กำลังไฟสูงก็ใช้ชิปซิลิคอนคาร์ไบด์ได้ข้อ 12 สามารถบอกได้ไหมครับว่าหลักๆคือคุณใดโอเค
We don't specifically give customer details, but I'm sure you know and everybody knows that the only major car company in Korea is Hyundai, right? Hyundai and Kia actually is the same company. Okay, so there is a lot of interest from all EV car makers in Korea and China. There's only one in Korea.
โอเคนะคะคำถามที่ว่าหลักๆเนี่ยจะเป็นให้รถยนต์ฮุนไดหรือเปล่าจริงๆเราก็จะไม่พูดถึงคู่ค้าโดยหลักการของเรานะคะแต่ว่าทุกๆคนน่าจะเดาได้ว่าผู้ผลิตอุตสาหกรรมยานยนต์หลักๆของเกาหลีก็จะมีฮุนไดเกียร์ซึ่งเกียร์ก็เป็นบริษัทเดียวกับฮุนไดแล้วเราก็ส่งให้ทางเมืองจีนด้วยค่ะ
And where is the big interest is not just the actual car manufacturer, but the companies that produce the battery and all the electronics that go into charging the battery. This will be the main focus for our company.
แล้วก็อีกส่วนหนึ่งก็ซิลิคอนคาร์ไบด์เนี่ยก็สามารถที่จะใช้และสำคัญที่ต้องใช้ในแบตเตอรี่รถยนต์ที่เป็นอิเล็กทรอนิกส์ EV อย่างเงี้ยค่ะอันนี้ก็คือเป็นส่วนสำคัญที่เรามุ่งหวังว่าอันนี้จะเป็นที่เราขยายตลาดและ product ของเราออกไปนะคะ
So typically we would not deal directly with the car manufacturer. We would deal directly with a company that is involved in supplying the car company with their battery management system.
เราจริงๆแล้วเราก็จะไม่ได้เป็นคู่ค้าโดยตรงกับบริษัทรถยนต์นะคะเราจะเป็นคู่ค้ากับบริษัทที่เขาส่งชิ้นส่วนให้กับบริษัทรถยนต์อีกทีนึงอย่างเช่นพวกแบตเตอรี่อย่างเงี้ยค่ะมีคำถามเพิ่มเติมอีกไหมคะ
Any other questions? Please feel free.
ถามได้นะคะ
So maybe we have a few minutes left. Maybe I will just summarize for this call. So I think the outlook for our industry still remains fairly reasonable, but obviously everyone is very worried about the inflationary issue and how the effects of rising interest rates will affect consumers. So we have to be careful now about our expansion because a lot of economists are projecting that the global growth will drop quite substantially from their earlier forecasts because of all these events that have, changed the world, like the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the China lockdown, things like that. So the one important thing about when you believe that we're going to go into a low growth or maybe even worse recession is to make sure your balance sheet is strong. And even though our cash situation has dropped significantly, it is still very, very strong. And despite the fact that we are losing money and burning cash in Korea as we start up, as a group, we are still generating cash, EBITDA positive. So HANA is still in a very good position, even if we have to face a difficult situation going forward. This is the key. A lot of companies have borrowed money during the COVID period, to get them through. And now, unfortunately, the outlook is not looking positive and the interest rates are rising. That will be a problem. If your balance sheet is weak, the demand goes down and interest rates go up. So HANA is not in that situation. I feel at least some level of comfort that we can face any difficult situation, with some level of confidence.
คุณริชาร์ดขอสรุปนะคะก่อนที่เราจะหมดเวลาตรงนี้นะคะก็ที่คุณริชาร์ดคาดการณ์แนวโน้มของธุรกิจเนี่ยตอนนี้ทุกคนกังวลเกี่ยวกับภาวะทางเศรษฐกิจนะคะไม่ว่าจะเป็นเรื่องเงินเฟ้อเรื่องน้ำมันแพงต่างๆนานาแต่ว่าเราก็จึงต้องระมัดระวังในเรื่องการขยายกิจการนะคะขยายลงทุนเพิ่มเติมแต่ยังไงก็ตามเนี่ย HANA เรามั่นใจว่าเรามีbalance sheet นะคะที่แข็งแรงแข็งแกร่งแล้วก็ HANA ก็มีความเติบโตที่เราไปในทางธุรกิจที่ขยายไปในทางธุรกิจที่เรามั่นใจว่ามันจะต่อยอดให้ธุรกิจของเราที่เรามีอยู่ณขณะนี้นะคะส่วนสถานะของบริษัทของเราตอนนี้เราก็อยู่ในสถานะที่มั่นคงแล้วก็มั่นใจว่าเราจะฝ่าฟันอุปสรรคของเรื่องเศรษฐกิจในช่วงนี้ไปได้อย่างแน่นอนค่ะขอบคุณมาค่ะมีคำถามอะไรอีกไหมคะ
1 minute last question anybody Okay, well, if not, we wish you good luck, stay safe, and maybe see you next quarter.